Yeah, Bennett, everyone. Well, I guess it's noon on Navajo Nation. I am speaking to you from Arizona, so it's still morning for me. Welcome to today's Citizen Hour that is part of our Special Helium Series. We did reach out to Navajo Nation Oil and Gas. We wanted to give them an opportunity to sort of present their proposal to the public and share facts and provide you all an opportunity to ask questions. We've been trying to reach them since last Tuesday. We were finally able to connect with their CEO, James McClure, earlier this week, and he had confirmed for today for 30 minutes, but unfortunately there was a change in his flight schedule, so he's unable to join us today, and there's nobody else in the organization apparently that's able to fill in and provide the summary. So I am going to do my best to share with you some of the information that I've learned about the proposal. I'm going to focus on the Porcupine Dome lease agreement. I think this is the Porcupine Dome lease agreement that I'm going to be walking through. It's identified in the legislation as Exhibit A. But I did notice that Exhibit A1 is supposed to be the programmatic environmental assessment for Porcupine Dome, but the title actually says it's for a different project. So I don't know if the attachments to the legislation are what they should be or what they've been identified as in the legislation. So that's just something to note that might not be accurate. And hopefully you all have had a chance to access the legislation. It's a really substantial document. It's 805 pages, and it's legislation 0232-21, reflecting that it was introduced last year. The legislation itself is not very long. What is really long are the includes the three operating agreements / lease agreements, as well as attachments to those agreements, like the programmatic environmental assessment and numerous, like the lease documents, things of that nature. So give me 1 second and I can actually run through what those attachments are exactly. So for Exhibit A, apologies, Exhibit A, that lease agreement is actually supposed to be for Tohatchi Wash. But the programmatic EA that's attached to that is Exhibit A1 is for Porcupine Dome. And I understand that that is supposed to be part of Exhibit C. So there's the actual operating agreement for each of the projects that are attached as Exhibits A, B, and C. And then each of those exhibits has their own exhibits. So there's a programmatic environmental assessment, a survey and legal description, so it's really just 2 attachments to those main 3 attachments or exhibits. And then there are also supporting resolutions for 2 of them from Tisnas chapter, 1 supporting resolution from Sanasti, and then Exhibit G is the executive official review documents. So that's a lot of documentation to navigate. The environmental assessments are going to be really helpful at explaining what the potential impacts of the project will be, whether that's environmental or cultural. So that's definitely, those are documents to look at. Those are also really helpful in terms of providing photographs, maps, things like that, and a better sense for what the projects actually are. The lease or the operating agreement itself was actually not that helpful in order to understand what's actually going to happen at these sites. For example, I know from reviewing this material previously that for the Beautiful Mountain development site, that's going to have 53 well pads. And there, when I reviewed the lease for Tohatchee Wash, it didn't say anything about how many well pads there would be or how many pipelines, or whether connecting pipelines would have to be produced or developed. That stuff I think is going to be more in the environmental assessment section. And next week on Thursday, we're going to have a panel from some folks sharing the potential environmental impacts of this proposed project. And really it's 3 proposed projects at the 3 different sites. And so I don't want to steal their thunder. They're going to go through the what the actual development on the sites is going to be and what those environmental impacts are. So I'm going to just stay focused today on the actual lease agreement content. And so that provides information such as the bonus amount. So for Tohatchee Wash, there's going to be an upfront bonus paid to the nation within 60 days of signing of the operating agreement for $276,000. And then there will also be delayed rental payments that are paid to the nation. I'll go into the specifics on the rental payments here in a minute. The Tohatchee Wash project is going to be 11,040 acres in size, located in San Juan County, New Mexico. The term of the lease agreement has 2 components. There's a primary term of up to 10 years, and then there's an option for an automatic 1-year renewal. And then there's a secondary term that basically lasts until there's no resource left to extract. And there are some parameters put on that. Basically, it's until this is no longer profitable. So there is a financial threshold built into this that says that as long as the net income from this project, after covering operation and maintenance for the lease properties and marketing of the production, after that, as long as it's making $0 in net income, this development project can continue under the secondary term. Which is, I found that kind of interesting. I don't know if that's standard in these types of lease agreements, but I guess I just understand that the company is seeking to make a profit here and might have a different threshold than $0 in net income. Unfortunately, we don't have a representative from NOG here to clarify that. And we may have them on later at some point. McClure, the CEO, did say that he was willing to come back at some later point. We do have a scheduled lineup. So we'll try to, fit him in at some point when he's available and when we have room in the schedule. So hopefully we'll have a chance to elaborate on what some of these things mean, or like why it would have a threshold of $0 net income to remain operational under the secondary term. And then in terms of what the lease agreement actually authorizes, under section 2A of that operating agreement, it clarifies that the bonus pays for NOG's exclusive right and privilege to drill for, extract, remove, and dispose of all of the oil and gas deposits, including helium gas, carbon dioxide gas, and sulfur gas at any depth within these, the acreage that is identified in the lease agreement. And for folks who may not be aware, NOG is Navajo Nation Oil and Gas Company. So this is not an external company that's coming in seeking to develop these resources or pursue these projects. This is an enterprise wholly owned by the Navajo Nation. It's a Section 17 corporation. So I just wanted to clarify that as well. And then in Section 3A of the operating agreement, the agreement authorizes NOG to conduct seismic surveys and build and maintain pipelines, transmission lines, and other lines quote, including without limitation, oil, gas, power, and water lines incidental to the operations authorized, close quote, under the operating agreement. It also authorizes NOG to conduct geophysical surveys on all or any part of the properties without charge for surface damages and or permit fees in favor of the nation. I thought that was interesting as well. And that's concerning to me, that there would be no charge incurred by NOG for surface damages, and that all permit fees would be waived with respect to the geophysical surveys. So that's another question I would love to have asked Mr. McClure to please clarify, what will these geophysical surveys look like? And, is this a standard term? I mean, that's one of the tricky situations when the Navajo Nation has these enterprises. Unfortunately, from what I've seen, the nation as a government does not negotiate with our enterprises at an arm's length. It has, the council has shareholder representatives who are members of the council. They're council delegates who basically represent the nation's interests, and they attend board meetings for these enterprises. And they actually, from what I've seen, become strong advocates for the enterprises, which to me is concerning because that's not their role. Their role is to represent the nation's interests with respect to the corporation and make sure the corporation is meeting the nation's interests versus, seeking the best outcome for the corporation. And that's sort of what I've seen more of, is the shareholder representatives thinking that they're an advocate for the corporation rather than for the nation and the Navajo people when they serve in these positions as shareholder representatives. And then in section 4, that covers the royalties and the rental payments. There's a delay rental payment that goes into effect if acreage is not producing anything. And that rental payment is $10 per acre. And then if that acreage is actually productive, if it's producing oil or gas, then the annual operating agreement rental payment is $2 per acre. I thought that was also interesting as well. I would think that the rental payment would be higher if it's a higher value acre under the agreement, but it's just using common sense. There's also an oil royalty, which is essentially 20% of the value. There's like a complicated formula that they use. Like there are two numbers. There's the higher of one of two options, one being the gross proceeds from the oil, or they use an index, a national index developed by the federal government. So, and most of the royalties contained within this agreement use that same configuration where it's either the gross proceeds or an index amount, and they go by the higher of those two items. For gas royalties, excluding helium, there will be a 20% royalty. There is also an option for a royalty in kind, so that the nation can take its royalty share of oil in kind. That would be interesting because I think we're talking about crude oil, unprocessed, unmarketable, and really unusable oil. So it's interesting to see that there is that option. I wonder how that would play out if the nation exercised that option. I guess the nation could sell that directly to someone else, to a refinery. But that was an interesting component. There's also a specific helium royalty of 20%. That has a really complicated configuration to determine the basis of the 20%. So if people are interested, I would encourage you to read the document. I'm not going to try to guess exactly what is meant by the language there. And then we have a provision that relates to natural gas liquids, argon and other gas productions. That's also a 20% royalty. And then there are provisions that provide for funding towards Navajo Nation Scholarship Fund. So during the initial term, that 10-year, possibly 11-year period, which sort of seems like more the exploratory period, right? There is a commitment in the document for NOG to provide $10,000 to the scholarship fund. And then during the secondary term, which I think of as like the production period, more so, there is a provision that requires payment by NOG of $2,000 per producing well, which sounds interesting. And, you know, when I first read that, I thought, okay, that doesn't sound like very much. But if you have lots of wells, like there's going to be 53 well beds at one of these sites, if all 53 of those wells are productive, 53 times 2,000, okay, that's still not a lot, but that's meaningful. I'm guessing that's over $100,000. I'm not a mathematician, and I'm also just not good at math. So that's, you know, that's something, maybe. But then there's a ceiling. So they're not, you know, they are required, there's a floor and a ceiling with respect to this. During the secondary term, they have to provide at least $15,000. So that's better than the initial term, but they don't have to provide more than $50,000. I can tell you that $50,000 isn't enough to pay for one-year tuition at many educational institutions in this country. So I'm really disappointed in that ceiling. And then, of course, there's a 5% payment in lieu of taxes. So anyway, that's just some of the components on the revenues that could be generated to the nation. The most significant to me is really that bonus payment of almost $250,000, well, over $250,000. And then there's some language regarding reclamation that says the operator, which is NOG, shall surrender the operating agreement area in a condition that complies with applicable nation and federal laws. And so I'm really curious about that as well. And I would have loved to have asked Mr. McClure, like, what does that mean exactly? Like, what does that actually look like in terms of the reclamation? I guess it concerns me that there is not a reclamation agreement developed now that can be attached to this legislation to kind of lay out some of the framework for what that reclamation will actually look like. So that is just a quick run through of the operating agreement. Again, I encourage you to look at the actual legislation. You can access that on this website called DIB. It's something that the Office of Legislative Services makes available. It is difficult to find the legislation if you don't have the legislation number. So make sure you have that. And let me again provide that to you. This is legislation 0232-21. That should bring up the operating agreement. I actually searched for the operating agreement legislation under helium and nothing came up. So again, make sure you have the legislation number. That will make your search much easier. If you have any problems using DIB, or if you just want someone to give you the document directly, I encourage you to call the Office of Legislative Services. They're extremely helpful. They can walk you through DIB, or they can probably just email you a copy of the legislation. That might be the best way to go to make sure you have the most current version. Let's see. So that is, if people have questions, feel free to post in the chat and I will do my best to answer them. I had no part in developing this agreement or this legislation. I'm just telling you what I read in the document. And I'm not going to go through all of the agreements, but you know, that is the one for Tohatchee Wash. And I did want to share with you some maps. So I'm gonna share my screen here in a moment. And again, you know, like when I was trying to familiarize myself with these projects, where I went was really the programmatic environmental assessment, because again, that lays out, you know, what are the different types of impacts that are going to come with this project. So let me go ahead. I'm going to pull up the legislation. And these are my notes based on a previous version of the legislation that was found online through DIBS. So my page numbers may not be on point, but I'm going to use those to try to jump around in the document, kind of show you what it looks like and where to find some good stuff that might be insightful. So let me see here. There we go. Sorry, some kind of cough. Okay, so here's legislation 023221. The actual legislation itself is not very long. It's maybe 4 or 5 pages. Actually, it says 2 of 3 pages. So very short legislation. And okay, now we're in the operating agreement here. The operating agreement also was surprisingly short to me. I thought it would be much longer. So you can see here, a little unclear which site this relates to, because it doesn't name the site. It just gives you it gives you like the section numbers and things like that. Properties, here we go. And it refers to another section of the document, 2A. Yeah, here it is. Township, it gives you the township and range. So that doesn't really help me. Hopefully it's meaningful to some of you. The environmental assessment will be much more clear in terms of what site you're talking about. So you can see here, not a very long document. Maybe 15 pages is what I'm recalling, 16-page document. So not a very long operating agreement. Granted, for people who are not lawyers, it's going to be tough to read. But hopefully my little notes here can help you navigate it. And I tried to distill it down to like the really important stuff that might be meaningful. It has an attachment, like here, see, it's Porcupine Dome, and this is supposed to be Tehachapi Wash. So the first maps that I found interesting or helpful were on page 165 when I looked at this last time. Here we go. Make sure there's nothing missing from this. Okay, so for those of you in New Mexico, this probably means something really precise. This gives you kind of the general vicinity, San Juan County. And then I find these maps really helpful. This kind of shows you what the site actually looks like. You can see, I mean, this seems to say Sanasti, the community. It would be surprising to me if it was within the leased area, but it kind of looks like it from this map. So that would be a nice thing to get clarification from Mr. McClure and Nog on. It actually has 2 parcels associated with it that are non-contiguous. Some additional mapping that shows, I think this shows the well beds. Previous site. It's not well beds. I'm not sure what it means by previous site, but it's a cultural resource survey, so maybe those are cultural sites. You can see there's quite a few of them in there. And this is just part of, they had to break it into 5 different maps in order to get everything on there. So quite a few cultural sites here. Okay. Here's the last one. Don't actually see anything in there. So anyway, that's a little sense for what that Porcupine Dome site will look like. They're also, they identify the drill beds or drill pad sites and things of that nature in these programmatic environmental assessments. I apologize, I'm going to scroll through it really quickly and just show you what the table of contents looks like so you can have a sense for what's contained in these documents. So again, this is the it's a very long document. This is 800 pages. Okay, it's going to take me a while to find the table of contents, so I'm going to skip that, but I'm going to jump to the next map so you don't have to suffer through the scrolling. So let's see, 248. This is the project area. What that looks like, beautiful mountain. So, let's look at the more detailed map. I usually have the maps all together. Actually, this kind of looks like Porcupine Dome to me again. But it's not showing the second site. So maybe that's not. Okay, and then, and I'm showing you these just so you have a sense for, you know, like where are these specific sites? Again, there are 3 sites. There is one in Tisnas Pass, there's Porcupine Dome, and then there's Beautiful Mountain. Apologize for my little guy. He's having a tough morning today. There you go. Here's Beautiful Mountain. Yeah, actually that was Beautiful Mountain. So this shows you more specifics. You see the pipelines and the here's an existing pipeline, proposed gathering pipeline. So these blue lines, blue and white lines, those are the proposed pipelines. I think the red dots are the well beds. So you can see, like, I think Beautiful Mountain is the one that has 53 of these. Oh, okay, here. The red dots are proposed surface hole locations. So that's where they'll actually be drilling. I don't know if some of you are from this area, you can maybe have a better sense for where this is exactly. Okay, go ahead and jump to the next map. Okay, this is the Tisnas Pass site. So the other sites are like over here where my mouse is, like, from what I can tell. I mean, I don't know this region really well. We're going to work on putting together maps so you can see where all 3 of the sites are. And then the third site is over here. Make sure I'm not totally off. Oh, okay, I am way off. All right, here's Sanasti. So for that original site, Porcupine Dome, you know, it included Sanasti, it looked like. And then I think Beautiful Mountain is over here. And then T-SNES site. Looks to be right here. It looks like it's right at that junction when you're driving from Kienta to Shiprock, and there's that left turn you can make. Head over to the Ute Casino. Not that I do. I don't. You know, I don't encourage gaming. Life is hard enough without losing your money. This zooms you in on the site. It encompasses the community of T-SNES Paz and the trading post. Looks like an airport is included in that as well. I think it's really interesting that it's including community. It's interesting and greatly concerning to me because there are people living, concentrations of people living in these areas. So if I lived in those areas, I certainly want to know, like, where exactly are they going to be drilling? Just another map showing that area. You can see the streets here. Here's the housing development. The chapter house is probably in there. The rodeo grounds are in there. This is all within the T-SNES Paz site. It's 10,000 some odd acres. Okay, that's the last map I have to share with you guys. So I'm going to stop sharing my screen. I apologize again for the disruption in schedules and whatnot, and not being able to have a representative from NOG here. We do want to hear from them. We want to have an opportunity to hear them make their case for why this is a beneficial endeavor for the Navajo Nation and the Navajo people. The Navajo people really are the ones who own the corporation, and the council acts on our behalf as a representative to the people in our interests through their shareholder representatives. So we want to make sure that the people have an opportunity to ask questions of NOG representatives and get a better understanding on the proposed project. I highlighted some things of concern, questions that I have. I'm sure many of you have additional questions. I really only went into that one lease agreement closely. So I encourage you to extract that same information from the other lease agreements as well, just to get that better understanding. And I'm gonna develop a comparison, a more detailed comparison myself, and hopefully we'll be able to share that at some point, so you guys can kind of see, like, okay, this is what it entails. Like, here's the bonus for this site. Here's the royalties percentages for this site versus that site. And here's the acreage at issue here and there, and whatnot. So anyway, I hope you enjoyed today's presentation. I really wanted, we were talking about these proposals, but I hadn't seen really sort of a presentation of what the actual components of the projects would be. So I wanted to be able to give NOG the opportunity to share that. And of course, as I mentioned before, we're doing this as a series, just raising public awareness, making sure you all are informed on this important proposal. And so next week at the same time, on Thursday, we will have a panel going through environmental impacts. We will have Professor Jarlsberg back, that was part of our panel in February and did such a wonderful job, but that was such a fast panel. There was so much information to go through. So that's why we're having this series, so there's more time to kind of gain more of the information, because there's so much information involved here. And then we'll also have a speaker speaking on impacts to water. So I hope you'll join for that. And the next week, we're hoping to have a cultural impacts panel, again on a Thursday. And then we're inviting representatives from council the week after that to share their view on why this is, well, if they think it's important to pursue, why they think it's important to pursue, and to share with us what they think the impact of the Navajo economy will be. And if they have concerns or reservations, it's also an opportunity for them to share that. We'll also be inviting a representative from the Office of the President, so we can get a sense for what their thinking is on the proposal. As many of you know, this legislation was tabled last January or in January. There was supposed to be a work session. I'm not aware of the work session having happened. I don't think it has happened. I don't know when it will be scheduled. And the vote is supposed to happen at this upcoming session of council, which will be the third week of April. So we're trying to have these information sessions kind of leading into that. So folks can be, you all can be informed about this important proposal. As I noted before, the term is basically for as long as these lands are producing oil or gas. And I ran through the types of oil and gas that NOG will be developing or seeking to develop. And it's basically the full spectrum from what I can tell. I'm not an oil and gas person, but it named a lot of different types of oil and gas. I can't think of any oil and gas that they have excluded. In fact, they don't specifically exclude any oil or gas or natural resource. I hope you guys enjoyed today. I don't think we have any questions in the chat. I'm gonna see here if we have. Okay, and we did post the DIBS link in the comments section. Looks like we don't have any questions. Okay, great. Well, thanks everyone for joining today. I apologize again that we couldn't have a representative from NOG here. We had some extenuating circumstances, and hopefully we will have someone here at some point to be able to ask your questions and to share the project and their view of why it's so important to proceed. So ahead, go on that, have a beautiful day, and I'll see you again next week.